What is going on, Small Gains family? Welcome back to another episode of the podcast. And it's going to be an interesting one today because this is essentially the hybrid training version of the Karate Kid with two coaches, in the sense that Tom is Mr. Miyagi and I am the Karate Kid. And I joke about this all the time, and I call Tom Mr. Miyagi because he's very considered, he's very formulaic in the best possible way when it comes to trying to get better at something or to reach a goal in terms of strength, fitness, and endurance. And when he was training me for my first high rocks, it very much felt like I was doing painting the fence and I was doing wax on, wax off. And then eventually it all came together. And that's kind of why I started calling him Mr. Miyagi, I guess. Now, the reason that I wanted to get Tom on here today was to do a podcast about low volume, because low volume training has kind of started to surface as a trending topic. And low volume for one person isn't the same as another person. Now, when it comes to low volume, we're not necessarily thinking about things in isolation. We're thinking about the total amount of work that we do across the week. If we're in the gym, how many working sets are we doing per muscle group? If we're running, how much volume are we building accumulatively across the week? Same would apply to, swimming, cycling, and whatnot. And this isn't necessarily something either of us would talk about with the people that we work with specifically, unless they asked us. The reason being that we obviously support people building their strength and endurance. We support them through races and comps. We also just support the everyday person that cares about their long-term health and wants to move their body to feel good. We support people with aesthetic goals. We support people with health goals. The spectrum is really big. And when people are talking about a low volume approach to training and what is the right amount of volume, a lot of the time that chat is all around bodybuilders. And this conversation took a really interesting turn because we started talking about volume and training impact in relation to stress and in relation to recovery, in relation to training age, a beginner lifter and runner versus someone more intermediate. We talk about considerations for neurodivergent people or people that generally live with higher stress or struggle with day-to-day basic habits that keep us well: stress, sleep, and nutrition. So whilst this is a podcast about low volume, it's not really a podcast about low volume. And one final thing, I just thought it would be cool for the people that listen to this podcast to meet the person that helped me get to all the places that I want to be, the person that asks me the difficult questions, the person that I come to when I've struggled through a session or I have questions about why I'm doing what I'm doing. And before Tom started coaching me, we worked together at Pure Gym and we would talk a lot about lots of different things. And eventually when I moved on to being online, I approached Tom to help me train for my first high rocks. And now it's been about 3 years. I'm the strongest, the fittest and the most jacked I've ever been. I'm the fastest I've ever been. I'm the least injured I've ever been. And as a result of working with Tom, all of my clients benefit from that as well. So if you're one of my clients that's listening to this today, Tom has second-handedly influenced and had a positive impact on your journey, which I think is pretty cool. So I'm going to stop waffling on now. Let's do the thing. When it comes to strength and running, or hybrid, I guess, what would you consider a low volume approach? Not an elite athlete, just general population that have an interest in strength training and running.
The fact that you mentioned like elites there is important because it can be relative in a way, because there's always going to be somebody doing more, right? So then low volume is a moving scale. But if we're going to define it, we could probably look at it through the lens of the minimum effective dose of each of the like athletic properties that we're trying to develop, right? It's okay, well, what's the bare minimum amount of work that we need to do to start seeing progress in both of those? So that could be a baseline, like low volume approach, right? But to put numbers on it, it's also going to be a very individual thing. So we could just go down that route of, okay, well, low volume, minimum effective dose of each. That's how we're going to approach it.
When I was thinking about this, I was thinking about how my low volume is going to be way different than someone else's low volume. The minimum effective dose, I guess, is going to depend on people's goals. So if someone's goal is like long-term health and just feeling good versus someone's goal being like to run a marathon, low volume's going to look massively different. If you do a low volume week, it'll look different to my low volume week, I guess, because we've got a different training age versus, you know, any of the people that we coach.
There's certain characteristics that are going to dictate how much the minimum effective dose is going to look like, right? One of them being obviously the training goal, because there's certain, if you're doing something like you said, like a marathon, there's certain KPIs that we're going to need to hit. But largely, most people's minimum effective dose is going to be dictated by training age, it's going to be dictated by your experience, but then also things like lifestyle factors, stress, sleep, nutrition, all those sort of things that sit outside of the gym are really going to orchestrate the minimum amount of work that you can do and feasibly get away with.
What do you see the benefits of a low volume training approach being?
So I think, generally speaking, I'm not going to say better recovery, but more opportunities to recover being one, which means that we can put a little bit more intensity in. And with that being more time efficient, because there's less total training within a week, there's less barriers. Everyone's time poor, so that can often be removed. When we remove that with consistency and adherence, and as we know, if we can do anything consistently, like it doesn't really matter how you approach it, you're going to get better at that thing. Even if the program's rubbish, if the program's great, if we're consistent, we're going to get something from it. So yeah, biggest benefit being like time efficiency. I'm sure you agree on that one.
Yeah, because we're all busy. Like, no matter how we look at it now, with the world that we live in, pretty much like 99% of us in the UK and probably in America, the folks in America that listen to this are busy. And depending on where the gym is, how long it takes to get there, whether you work from home or you're in an office, you know, it's something that can work really, really well for people if they have goals, but also if they're just wanting to like take care of their long-term health, be strong, feel good. I think the biggest misconception I see is that if you do less volume, there's no point. And that's maybe the first misconception that I want to kind of get into. I think the thing that made me think about this was I had a client say to me when they were struggling with their consistency was, well, I've only got 2 strength programmed. Sometimes it just feels like there's no point. And then we unpicked that and started talking about, you know, the simplest way to put it, which was if you did like 10 bodyweight squats a week for 52 weeks, then you've done 520. If you don't do any, you've done none. And it's 520 like bodyweight squats versus 0. There's always going to be a benefit to doing something. And I think the other thing that come into it with them was knowing that it can work and seeing and believing that it could work for them, but they had to almost trust it before they built their evidence that it was possible. And they've been at the forefront of my mind when I've been thinking about low volume, and also while I've done less training volume with you this year, because for like 3 or 4 months, they did 2 workouts a week after really struggling to even do one. And they've got so many benefits out of it. They've been so consistent. Their physique has changed. Their strength has changed. Their energy has changed. All of their weights have gone up. So I think once you have the evidence that it works, it's easier to do it.
I think there's this very warped misconception about the amount of work that we need to do to start seeing progress, especially in beginners, because what happens is most people look at people they aspire to be like and be like, okay, well, I want to be like them. I need to do the thing that they're doing, without ever connecting the dots that what they're doing right now isn't the thing that got them there. And it's like to then work backwards from that point and realize that they started somewhere where their volume was super low because they were a beginner, and they've gone through this sort of stage by stage process to get to the point where they can feasibly do the work they're doing now and go away and recover from that and get better. But once you, like you said, have that evidence that, okay, well, this is the amount of work that we're going to do and it's challenging for you right now, and each week we can look at what parameters are we using to understand and make progress, then it makes it a little bit more of an easier transition into sort of those more challenging weeks, I guess. And rightly so, like people have others they aspire to be like, role models, which is great, but it's just understanding the journey that, like, how have they got to that point? Okay. So yeah, I think that's where that blurred line often comes from.
Yeah, if you don't do the same thing that the possibility person is doing right now, then you're not going to get to where they are. And I think that the example of like really jacked hybrid athletes is probably quite good here. All the guys that started out as bodybuilders and now they run and they're like tanks. And I think people think now that's maybe like the baseline, but like they've bodybuilt for 10 years. And so all of that accumulated muscle, like they're not just going to strip themselves of it when they start running, which is probably also a misconception, isn't it? But it's like almost like the journey before isn't always talked about.
Yeah, well, it's a strange one, isn't it? 'Cause it's like Jack guy, bodybuilding for 10 years, starts doing a bit of endurance and sees some progress, like, buy my program because this is what I did to get like this. Like, it's not. People's athletic past is obviously very, very different. And that's not to say that you can't end up in that situation doing like this mixed model, quote unquote, hybrid sort of like concurrent training at all. It's just that probably going to take a little bit longer, because if you're trying to develop multiple athletic qualities at once, right, then we revert back to that minimum effective dose, right? You have to do the minimum effective dose of each because you've only got so many recovery resources that you can dedicate to recovery in a given week. So if you then stripped away a load of those athletic properties and focused on one and dialed in all your recovery resources into that one thing, you're obviously going to see way better progress. It's fun, right? Having a little bit of everything to do it's entertaining, and that's a key point, right? There's a lot of avenues that people go down. It's like, oh, well, coaching or fitness doesn't need to be entertaining. It needs to be appropriate for the person. And there's people who are just entertaining. You need to have that like fine balance of like being both entertaining and productive. So yeah, we've got to have some fun with it, life's short.
100%. And if something's not like stimulating, or if there isn't something that makes you want to try, you're not going to want to do it as much. And I think sometimes maybe that's where low volume can be quite good. And I guess that's where it's like not the one size fits all. Do you consider any part of your training now, strength or endurance, low volume for you specifically?
I would say he sort of sits in like a mid-range. When I talk low volume, I talk about, for example, hard working sets per week rather than session frequency. So for example, the minimum generally that we can probably get away with is like 6 sets per muscle group per week, which is really easy to get in. It's like, can you get 6 challenging sets for pecs in a week? Yeah, of course you can. Like 3 on one day, 3 on another. It's super easy. So I probably sit more like towards like 9 to 12 hard working sets per muscle group per week. For hypertrophy, I probably do 1 to 2 hard top sets for a squat or a press, or like a heavy pulling movement, and then that's pretty much all I do. So it might end up being somewhere between like 10 to 13 sets, strength plus hypertrophy when it comes to strength training.
And what about running, cycling, swimming, depending on if you're training for anything?
So right now I've got nothing booked in. I'm eyeing up some marathons next year, but I'm just trying my body back to health because I have like a string of injuries off the back of doing some stupid things that I wasn't prepared for. I only run once a week at the minute. It's normally something like a little bit punchier, either some like threshold intervals or like a tempo run, because my volume of running is relatively low. So I want my intensities to be somewhat high. And then I'll do some conditioning in the gym. And that's normally something a little bit more punchy as well. So some like high power repeats on like a ski erg or an assault bike like that. But at the minute, I'm not doing that much endurance work. When we were doing a lot of endurance work, it was a little bit I wouldn't say excessive because it obviously worked very well, but it was very time consuming. When we were prepping for Ironman, something like we might have been cycling 8 to 10 hours a week, doing 2 to 3 hours of running, maybe 2 hours of swimming, and then plus strength work. So you end up with no life, which is it's less than ideal. I'm in a very different position now where my total volume of work is much lower than it has been in the past.
I think I did anywhere between 5 to 6 sessions a week when we started working together, probably like 5 in the gym, which was a mixture of strength and conditioning. And then sometimes I would do one of your like weekend classes when I was back at Pure Gym with you lot. And you know what? That felt really good. That was when we were training for High Rocks. But then when we got into marathon stuff and my legs were like in uncharted territory, and as we all know on this podcast, my legs are shit.
Not anymore. Not after this. They seem to be in a much better position. Let's just put that one in
Very
there.
true. Yeah. Everyone that listens to this knows the struggle of my legs. And so when we went into marathon training, I was doing 3 strength and 2 runs. That then changed to 3 strength and 1 run. And then that went down to 2 strength and 1 run. And even some weeks I didn't recover well enough towards the very end of the block to actually get the run volume in because of my recovery. I don't think your intention was for me to reduce volume as much as we had to, but we did it because we had to. Like, I can't explain it, but just doing 2 gym sessions a week and 1 long run leading up to the marathon, because the run took everything out of my legs, it then just like wrote me off, not just for strength training, but for life, for social, for work. All my energy had to start with work and with clients. And then the next priority down was like walk the dog, do the big run, eat, sleep, do everything around that. But I think even towards the end, when I was doing the strength sessions, I was doing a lot of like stuff between 5 and 8 reps, around 4 sets for the big lifts. But then you were giving me like 2 really hard sets for accessories. And I don't think I would have been able to give any more than that. And I guess from that point, that was enforced low volume as opposed to like preferential. Was that what you would do with someone that didn't have shit legs?
I think this is where we go down this rabbit hole of like individualization, because essentially, and we touched on this earlier, an appropriate training program to move somebody forward is dictated by 2 things, or like by multiple things. One being the goal, obviously, because it needs to be like create some forward momentum to that point. And then the second thing is everything that sits outside of the gym, literally everything. So we've got sleep, we've got nutrition, and we've got stress, like 3 pillars, which we can like that govern everything. I always put stress at the top because stress downstream has an impact on things like sleep and nutrition. Now, if somebody is, I don't know who coined this analogy, it wasn't me, and I wish I could remember it to give them the credit, but I always speak about stress like a bucket, okay? And it fills up from everything going on in our life. Yeah, you might have fallen out with your partner, work stress, financial stress, transfer from training, and everything's pouring into this bucket. And the aim is we don't want it to overflow, right? We want to have like a release valve to make sure that it doesn't go over the top. Now, if somebody's spending their life in this sympathetic nervous system state where their stress is ruling their entire life, they're going to work and they're coming home stressed and all this sort of stuff, they're never going to be in a great position to actually push the training that they want. Because 2 things: minimum effective dose, the least amount of work that you can do, maximum recoverable volume. Okay. Anywhere in between there, you're going to see progress. If you get in a position where you stress all the time, which means your sleep sucks and your nutrition isn't great, then your maximum recoverable volume shifts downwards, which means we can do less total work and go away and recover from it, which then becomes problematic, right? So when we look at a training program, it needs to have a direction that is going in, but it also needs to be incredibly fluid in that it has to respond to all lifestyle factors that sit outside of the gym. I've been in a fortunate position to work with some really cool people, right? And one situation sticks out in my mind. He owns restaurants and opened a new restaurant and all this sort of stuff, super stressful. And I was giving him more days off than he's ever had. And he was like, why am I not training? It's like, because of this. It's like, this is like the least amount that we can get away with and you not be screwed over for the rest of the week when you've got all these other things on. So yeah, the way we approached it with you wasn't necessarily like a conventional way in terms of how we would build towards a marathon. And there's a million different ways in which you could do that and do that successfully. But with everything that you have going on, like you're super busy with work and band and all that, everything that's going on in your life, it's like, okay, well, this might be the most appropriate way to attack it now based on how much we can actually go where we're coming from, whilst hitting those minimum KPIs that we needed to hit to actually get a marathon done.
Yeah, and I think the other thing is that we knew that if I made it to the start line in one piece, the brain would be strong enough to do the thing, which was the marathon. And that's, I suppose, that's just from training, age, and experience.
I think one of the caveats we need to mention is everything works. I say this all the time. Everything will work if you train hard and be consistent. Low volume, high volume, pretty much all rep ranges, pretty much all splits. You're going to see success in all of them if you do them hard and well. So that's the caveat to that, I guess.
All right, let me stop us right there for a minute. What you're probably hearing from this chat so far is that everything kind of works. If you do something for long enough, it will work. And it's very important for that thing to fit around your life and on your terms. And about a year ago, I noticed that there was this big surge in people advertising hybrid training programs. And it was like double training days, training 6 days a week, a very high volume of training for someone that goes to work, has a social life. So a year ago, I created my lift and run group program called Fast and Ferocious. It's for people that have already got a little bit of lifting and running experience, but they lack the structure and the consistency to combine the two and get better at both of them at the same time. So on Fast and Ferocious, you can pick from 3 strength sessions and 2 runs every week. Most people on the program choose anywhere between 3 to 5 sessions a week based on what they have going on in their life and their schedule. We have a new block of programming every 8 weeks to keep things fresh, to keep it interesting and to keep you stimulated. And within that block of programming, we always have 2 strength movement focuses and 1 run focus. So every 8 weeks, we have a mini goal to chase, to get after, to keep us pushing ourselves forward, to keep us leveling up, to keep things exciting. And all they have to do is open their app on a Monday morning. They can see their sessions for running and strength. They can move them around in the app to the days that they want to do them. Then they show up to the gym or they head out for a run. They open the app, they look at my instructions. It tells them what to do, how many sets and reps to do. They don't need to worry about how many sets per muscle group they're doing every week because I've taken care of it. They don't need to think about how intense or how heavy something should be because I tell them how it should feel. They don't need to worry that they're not doing the right work in the gym to support their running because I've built it all and they know it's taken care of. And that is the awesome thing about having structured programming. No fluff, you show up and it works. You become stronger, faster, more enduring, more jacked, and it costs far less than your daily coffee. And if you feel like this might be your flavor, you've maybe been interested in it before, but it's not been the right time, I'll leave the form in the show notes for you. Apply via that form. I'll get back to you with any questions you've got, and we'll get you set up for the next block of programming. You don't need to be the best lifter in the world or the best runner in the world. You just need a baseline of experience in the gym and a pair of running shoes. And if you're listening to this podcast, I know you are the exact kind of person that I would love to have on the team. Form in the show notes. I would love you to join us. Let's get back into this now, shall we? If you've got a higher training age, for the people that haven't heard like the term training age, essentially just how long you've been training for consistently. If you've got a higher training age, will a low volume approach lose you any muscle mass? I know the research to this, but based on your experience, is it better to have a higher training age when you're doing lower volume, or does it not make a difference?
So I'm going to use an analogy that was explained to me by James Fitzgerald at OPEX, and it's really good. So imagine like when you first start, imagine a light bulb, and when you first start training, you can almost like just make it flicker. Yeah. Like it doesn't really, you get a little bit of a spark. Now, as we start to accumulate more quality reps, okay, that's our training age increasing. That light bulb starts to flicker more and more and more. And then when we get to an advanced point, that light bulb's really bright. So all that means is, okay, we can go deeper in terms of intensity. Okay, we can push harder because we've got better motor unit recruitment, so we can push harder in those sets, lift more load, lift more intensity. Now, if we compare those two low volume, quote unquote, low volume situations to a beginner and advanced, the key difference between those is the intensity. Yeah. So they're both low volume, but the amount at which you can push because you've accumulated those quality reps is way more. So that, in a sense, could be the argument for mitigating potential like muscle loss if you're going from like a higher volume program to a lower volume program as someone who's more advanced, because you can put more intensity in. But then you've also got to look at, like, without even looking at any studies or any data, just look at like the anecdotal evidence from people like Dorian Yates, who was one of the greatest British bodybuilders of all time, who was famously low volume and high intensity. You know, obviously he was on performance enhancing drugs and has elite level genetics, but it worked for him, you know. So anyway, back to you. You tell me what the evidence says, 'cause I'm interested to hear.
They said it was 9, like 9 sets, and you've said 6. And I don't know whether it was a controlled study or whether it was like a meta-analysis that said 9. So when Jeff Nippard did all of his low volume stuff and he looked at the research, he basically tried it for 100 days and did like the bottom end of that. And I think he ended up doing, it was actually 12, and he decided that for him was low volume. But I suppose when we think about, you know, you said what worked for Dorian Yates, what worked for you, what worked for me. You know, I personally know that I've got better doing 6 to 8 hard sets of bench a week, not bench like chest. One of those being like a push, one of those being like a fly. And that's pretty much what I've done for the last year. So you say 6, they say 9. Maybe it's something in the middle, or maybe it's just really circumstantial to the person.
Yeah, I think you're right. People like Jeff Nippard, they're on the advanced end of the spectrum. The likelihood is they're going to need more anyway. We work with people who aren't bodybuilders. You know, we work with people who have multiple athletic goals. We're trying to develop multiple athletic qualities at a time. And we go back to that point. You've only got a certain amount of recovery resources in a week, right? If you dedicate more of your training volume to more sets, that's going to have to be taken from somewhere else. Maybe one of the other things that you're trying to develop. So yeah, it's always a moving scale. If people are listening, they're wondering, okay, well, what's the right amount for me? We'll start at a low, start at 6, and then are you seeing progress? If no, do an extra set per week, like see what happens. You know what I mean? Fuck around and find out, because they are all these individual characteristics that make up what's the appropriate amount for you.
Yeah, 100%. And I suppose if someone right now feels like their volume is too high, they're not recovering, they're tired, they're not enjoying it, what would you suggest their approach would be to cutting down their volume? Would they look at their sets? Would they look at their session duration? Would they look at their session frequency? Would they look at all 3?
Actually, get them to look at their sleep and their food first, and their stress, because we might be unnecessarily reducing training volume when that's not the problem. Yeah. You know, well, it is the problem because they're not recovering from it and they're not enjoying it, but we could then reduce training volume if we don't address all the other things that are going on. Then we can when can we ever push intensity or increase it when we're not fully recovering? So that'll be the first thing. If people are struggling, I'd be like, okay, well, am I sleeping enough? If I'm not sleeping enough, like what steps can I put in place to improve that? Am I managing my stress appropriately? What steps can I put in place to improve that? Am I dialing in my nutrition? If all those factors are like bang on, and then we're still not recovering well from the volume of training that we're doing, then we say, okay, well, how do we address that? Do we reduce? And like I say, when I talk about volume, I talk about hard sets per week, because the rep range thing, like it's a bit of a minefield, really. You can see progress in pretty much all of them, subject to you training close to failure. So you'd be like, okay, well, how can we reduce volume? And that would be reducing total number of hard working sets per week, and then maybe bringing up in intensity. So how hard we're pushing or how close we're pushing to failure within that body of work. Whenever anybody gets like a niggle or injury or is having a problem, the first thing that we look at is, stress, sleep, and nutrition, always. Because you can almost like timeline what's happening. It's like injury and problem. What were you doing last week? Well, I was out on the beers Friday, Saturday night, loads of stress at work. That's why I was out on the beers, fell out with my partner, and then continued to train really hard. Then all of a sudden, there's the problem. It's normally everything that's sitting outside of that causes an issue or a negative training outcome, which is essentially what we're talking about. So yeah, that would be what I would look at first initially, and then take these steps to reduce training volume by reducing hard sets per week.
Yeah. I suppose almost like an interesting way to look at it would be if you're a person that does a bit of strength training and does a bit of running, if you had someone that wasn't improving their sleep, wasn't improving their stress, wasn't managing, well, not improving it, managing it, wasn't necessarily supporting themselves with their nutrition, at the point where they felt training still had to happen, what would you even recommend for that? I think the way I'm getting at this is I have a lot of people with chronic illness. I have a lot of people that have gone through a lot of trauma. I have a lot of people that are neurodivergent and use training as something, not necessarily like a fitness tool, hobby, or a performance tool, alongside things like medication, therapy. It's also a form of emotional regulation. And those people are also people that are going to struggle with stress and sleep. There's then a bit of a conflict because you want to recover, you want to get your stress and your sleep and your nutrition to a point where it feels like, you know, it's manageable, it's not overwhelming, and it's just ticking away. But without one, it's hard to regulate. What would your prescription be?
That's a very difficult question, actually.
Yeah, it's bonkers, isn't it? It's so hard because we can almost use me as an example if you want. Maybe me like 7 years ago, though, undiagnosed autism and ADHD, unable to regulate emotions and unaware of that diagnosis, high stress, high overwhelm, sensory issues, issues with nutrition, sleep, stress, like in therapy. But the gym was the thing that regulated me in a way that other things didn't, even the things that were probably more important, like treatment wise. So taking that away would have been a detriment to everything else. So it's almost like it's really hard to unpick. And I definitely don't have all the answers. And a lot of it is like trial and error, finding out what works. But I'd be really interested to know what you felt about that when we think about a minimum effective dose of exercise for like a regulation perspective. What can that look like when stress is really high?
I think we're looking at it through a very different lens now, though. And I think we can almost throw terms like minimum effective dose out the window because sometimes training doesn't have to be about that. It's not always about the sets and the reps and chasing like numbers and PBs. If it's being used as a vehicle for something else, then sometimes just the enjoyment of moving your body and exercising is absolutely fine. And we don't necessarily need to be leaning into like all the data behind all the training science. Like it doesn't have to be like that. I mean, everyone's different and individual, and what we want to get out of the gym is it goes aligned with that. Now, if somebody was still this sort of like performance orientated as well, then that becomes a tricky one because the total amount of work that they can do in physio to go away and recover from all this is going to be less than if they were able to sleep better or were less stressed and all these sorts of things, right? But we can still do something. We can still get better. You know what I mean? It's like not like we can't do anything at all. It just might be that it has to be a little bit lower intensity, which means it might take a little bit longer to actually start seeing the progress that we want to see. But that's fine because that's the situation that we're in. You know, we can still create forward momentum. It just might not be in like the objective sense of training science.
Yeah. And you know what? That's probably described my training progress perfectly because everything for me has taken longer, not just due to injury, but like due to like just day to day, but also building a business. Because when you're thinking about people that have almost a sort of mental health thing that they navigate or like neurodiverse thing that they navigate, stress and overwhelm is just a lot higher anyway. Sleep is worse anyway. Nutrition is worse anyway. And you've hit the nail on the head there because it's like everything comes a little bit slower. And through that, I've had to be really patient. And I think when we think about trying to make progress, trying to be a bit more driven and performance based, but also enjoy it, the patience is like the biggest thing in a sense.
Yeah.
And maybe for people that struggle more mentally, it's probably more important to be patient because, you know, we all have the shit days where we can't do it. Everybody has those. Some people might have a few more shit days than others, I guess. And I don't know. I think the last thing I ever think about when I look at programming is, has Tom given me the minimum effective dose to get jacked this week? I don't ever think about that. When I program for clients, I don't ever think that because it's like a life first thing. Maybe the answer to all of this is that sometimes low volume can be the answer, but also sometimes just not at all.
Yeah, and it's a very much a read the room situation. Like we're speaking from a coach's
Yeah.
perspective. I don't think I've sat down with one of my clients and be like, "This is the minimum effective dose, and
Can
this
you
is why we're
imagine?
doing this." Like but it's like most of the time, it's okay. Well, how can we have some fun? How can we get you to adhere to this program and create a level of consistency so we can see progress here? And it's like, okay, we don't always need to go into the nitty gritty nuance training science with everyone, and not everything that's in our brains needs to be dribble out of our mouth and we need to say it. It's more just like creating the right conditions for whoever is in front of us to get the most out of their training week. Someone explained it brilliantly to me, saying that, I think it was Angus Bradley actually. He said that all we need is the golden week. That's all we need. We need one good week based on all the lifestyle factors we discussed, and then we just need to chop and change that as things change within your life. We just need a good week, like in terms of training. So yeah, it's a very interesting one. But yeah, it's like I said, it's a read the room type situation. Let's just go and have some fun and try to create some consistency, and good things will happen.
Yeah, and I guess it really is that simple. And that's why everyone's trying to sell things that are more complex, because the simple way isn't as clickbaity and isn't as attractive. Not necessarily honing in on the low volume, but using what you did with me in the last year as an example. We did less. So I did 4 sessions a week instead of 6 for the last year. I ran my first marathon. I PB'd my 5K, my 10K, my half marathon. I PB'd my deadlift, squat, pull up, strict press, clean, overhead squat, bench, and then loads of other accessory work. It was all on 4 sessions a week. Some of those months over summer weren't consistent because I was in a long distance relationship, very busy job. I had a week where I got sick and a week where I got an anomaly injury. And those who have listened to the podcast last week will already know about that. But on 4 sessions a week in the last year, like I've probably made more progress since April with all of my stuff than I have consistently in any other year of training, just 4 sessions a week. What did you get right about the programming, and what did I get right about doing it that made all of those things happen, do you think?
I think the marathon prep that we did was a big eye opener in terms of what your recoverability was like from
Yeah.
work. And I think the fact that less frequency, maybe a little bit more intensity in terms of how hard we were pushing the sets, and this shows extra days recovery, I think did wonders, especially with everything like how much you work. Those extra recovery days are really, really important. And I think what you did well is like actually pushing pretty hard, like really hard, especially when we look at like the key lifts that we do in squat, bench, dead, those sorts of things. Like we've got some real intensity in there. You know what I mean? Really close to failure and to failure on a lot of those on a lot of those movements.
Yeah, we started working a lot closer to failure post marathon. I think I've tried to get intensity into sessions before, but I think it just took more time to click. And I definitely see that in a lot of people that I work with, like dialing the intensity in, having the confidence to push it as well. I feel like almost training on your own when you have an online coach or you follow a program is also harder to get the intensity in. If
Yeah.
every time I bench pressed, you were there, my bench should probably be more. But being able to get the intensity that you can get on your own is almost like such a hard skill I found to master. And I think when I've worked with other coaches, they've not talked enough about intensity. And then that's led to not understanding why it's important. How can anyone listening that doesn't have a coach, but they might follow programs, get that intensity in by themselves?
If we go back to the analogy I used about the light bulb, like obviously a year of training under your belt, you've got an extra year's training age, which means you can push harder, like you've just got more tools in the toolbox to dig deeper into that sort of intensity of effort. When you're a beginner, right, everything feels challenging. Like RPEs doesn't even exist because everything's RPE 10, right? But over time, that naturally comes down. Yeah, as your experience builds, you know where your strength sits, and you know what it feels like pushing closer to failure. So, in terms of to answer the question, if someone was a beginner, I actually wouldn't worry too much about pushing that much intensity because it's all going to feel pretty tough. Like you don't need magic tricks or advanced training methods to get closer to that failure point because one, you don't really need to be going that close to it anyway because you are a beginner. Plus two, everything's going to feel tough regardless. So you get in, have some fun, and good things will happen. I've said it multiple times now, but if you're a beginner, just go and enjoy it. Find something that you enjoy and just stick with it. Or experiment, find and do multiple things and figure out what's the right thing for you. Now, as somebody gets more advanced, it's the whole training within close proximity to failure thing, right? Even you could even test, the more advanced you get, it's like, okay, well, do you know what failure feels like? No, well, push to failure. Pick a machine, something that's safe, and go to failure. Work as hard as you can, and now you know what an RPE 10 feels like, and you can work backwards from there. And then, generally speaking, we want to be somewhere between, I don't know, 0 to 5 RIR reps in reserve, and then you should be on to a winner. So there's quite a broad range in terms of intensity of effort that we can work with. So yeah, the answer is going to depending on the training age of the person that we're talking to.
Yeah, so intensity is going to feel different. The higher that training age, the more you'll be able to push, but the lower your training age, it's going to be harder anyway.
Pretty much.
If people think, am I working hard enough? Do you think there's a way that they can almost dial in and figure that out? If people are breezing through their sessions and coming out and thinking, am I not working hard enough? Is that a sign that they probably can push if they even think that in the first place? Or can sometimes people push themselves a little too hard?
Yeah, both of those situations, 100%. I think if someone's questioning whether their set is hard enough, one of the classic ones that I use and a lot of people use is it's the speed at which you can move the load, right? The velocity of the bar. Once it starts to slow down involuntarily, so you put in as much effort in as you can, but this starts to go slower compared to your first rep, then it's tough. It's a reasonably tough set, and you're probably in the ballpark of where you need to be. So just looking at the speed at which you're moving the load can be one of the easiest way to tell if a set's challenging enough to get to where you need to be.
I think that's the easiest one to look out for as well, especially if you're filming any of your sets, because when you watch them back, if you think you're working hard, but rep 1 and rep 8 look exactly the same, there's probably a little bit on the end.
Yeah.
When you talk about effective reps, how important is that to consider in every kind of exercise that we do?
Well, it's very important because if we're not doing any effective reps, we're essentially not going to get anywhere, Well, not that we're not going to get anywhere, but we're not going to see the progress that we want. So what the effective rep thing, the idea is that whole slowing down, the velocity of the load at which you're moving, slowing down involuntarily. And then that 0 to 5 RIR point, if you fall within that, we should be onto a winner, really. And I think don't be scared to go to failure at some point. It's failure, it's not like you failed. And I've had people like this before, I've given a range of reps that for them to hit, I don't know, 8 to 15, 8 to 12, and they fail at 7. It's good. That's good. You pushed hard. That is a brilliant set. Doesn't matter if it wasn't in the rep range that you want to get to. It's all good. You worked hard.
Yeah, it was still hard work. I think a real good example of that is if you've got lat raises programmed and the little weights that you normally use are taken and there's only one set of them, so you either go down or you go up. If you have to go up, going to get so many less reps because you're probably going up by 2 kg per dumbbell. You might normally do 20 and you might get 7. It was still like hard work was still done and it's not that deep.
Yeah, 100%. And like the rep range, I think the most recent research supports that like the rep range for building muscles like 6 to 35. It's like if you getting close to failure within that, you're winning.
Awesome. Final couple of questions for you before we wrap up. Anyone again that's like figuring out their own kind of hybrid of training with strength and running, what would be like your top tip for someone to figure out how much they want to do of each? What are the considerations?
Considerations initially would be, well, what is their running experience like? Okay, that's the big one because most people do too much too soon. And interestingly, this is an important point for anyone coming from like a functional fitness background, CrossFit or anything where they've done mixed model training. What I find is people who want to do more running, there's this huge disconnect. I'm going off on a tangent here, by the way, apologies. There's this huge disconnect between how fit someone is aerobically and what their body can mechanically handle from like a running perspective and all those eccentric contractions. And what generally happens is because they're fit, they feel like they can do loads of running because they're not being challenged, but their bones, connective tissues, muscles, everything is just not resilient enough to handle the volume of eccentric contractions that are going to be acquired during a run. So then they just get injured straight away. It depends on somebody's running experience. If you haven't done any running at all, you want to blend strength training and running, like running once per week could be absolutely fine. Doing the Couch to 5K workout from the NHS website is actually a perfect start. And I think that's actually twice per week. I could be wrong, but that would be perfect. But generally speaking, like 2 strength and two runs, like you should be able to hit like a decent amount of training volume. If those, I'd go with like 2 full body strength sessions and maybe like 2 runs. And you should be able to hit enough volume in both to actually see some progress. With the runs, what I generally get people to do is like a Couch to 5K and then build up to 60 minutes continuous. And then if we're still trying to keep that training volume relatively low in the week, I'd then break that 60 minutes down to something less volume and something a little bit more punchy, just so it's a bit more potent in terms of a stimulus. Yeah.
Yeah, because depending on what your aspirations are with running as well, whether you want to start doing some of the longer distances or if you want to just kind of get a little bit faster and stronger and fitter as well. 2 runs and 2 strength has been probably my preferred like split of training. 2 full body, 2 run, or 2 full body, 1 run, 1 like conditioning that has a bit of running in it that's more like gym based. As someone that's not a beginner, like I still like that. And I think what lent really well to it this year is that I enjoyed my social life way more because I wasn't doing 6 sessions. It gave me a lot more flexibility. And if I could do 6 sessions and do everything I wanted, I would. If I had like an extra 2 days in a week, like I would train more just because I like it. But I think like finding the balance between the volume and the life stuff and the work stuff is more important than we sometimes consider when we've got performance goals. And you can still hit all those performance goals. It might just not be super quick. I think I'm also okay with that. I'm not necessarily going to go from marathon to like Ironman. It doesn't mean I never want to try and do one, but in my head, I'm like, well, I value my time so much. And I think we're at a point where we all do because of how busy and demanding of attention like the world is. So I guess almost like that sweet spot, like 1 run, 2 strength, 2 run, 2 strength is almost like that 3 to 4 seems to be a good amount of volume to make progress, but not too much that you overtrain and get burnt out. Are we saying, do you reckon?
Yeah, well, it's the question is, okay, well, how much time can you commit in a week to be some form of training? Does that align with the goal? If yes, then yeah, we can work with that. If no, and I think we actually had this conversation recently about like people's misconceptions of the amount of work that needs to be put in to do things like marathons or like endurance event. If your lifestyle dictates this is the amount of training days or time you can do, then that kind of influences where progress is going to be made or whether the goal's appropriate and aligned. But yeah, like you can make great progress, a couple of strength sessions, a couple of runs, yeah, there's absolutely no reason why you can't make great progress with that sort of
Yeah,
split.
100%. I've got this mad Google sheet that I'm eventually gonna publish that's got all my like builds with all the big lifts and with running 4 sessions a week, just to use as an example. Like that's what strength a week looks like and 2 runs a week looks like for someone that's been training for X amount of time, as a resource. Final one before you leave me. I've started to ask everyone this in some capacity. If you had to design the Tom Strive of functional fitness races, what movements would you have and what distance would it be? First 2 questions.
Mine would be super simple. It'd be like, is this supposed to be one that I feel like I would want to win?
Yeah.
Or there's
Like
going to be
you would
fun?
want to do it with all your mates and have a lovely time.
I'd do something like really simple, like a 1 rep max, or like 10 minutes to find a 1 rep max back squat straight into a 5K, something like that.
Wait,
And that'd be,
quick and
yeah.
intense. I like that. What band would be the soundtrack? I'm really putting you on the spot here. There's a lot of pressure on this question.
I would normally go like Linkin Park, something
Oh,
like that.
fair enough.
Yeah. Everything's a banger.
Yeah,
So
no, very true. I've not actually listened to the new record with the new singer yet, but I know some of my lot have been to the shows and absolutely love it. Maybe that'll be my gym soundtrack later.
yeah, dude.
Hey, thank you so much for coming on. I appreciate it a lot. And yeah, I guess I'll let you know how my workout goes later as well.
Well, thanks for having me. This was fun.
Yes, Small Gains family. That was my coach, Tom, chatting about low volume, but also not really low volume. And I think the thing that I got from this episode was that a lot of the people that I coach are training like this already. I'd say the most common amount of workouts that get done in my team in Fuzz Culture Club is anywhere between 2 to 4 sessions a week. I have some people that do 5 or 6. I have some people that do 1 or 2. But most commonly out of the whole team, I would say people are doing anywhere between 2 to 4 sessions a week. And that is almost like a flexible range. And you know me, I love ranges, I love flexibility, and I love nuance. So if there's anything that you take from this, let it be that everything works if you show up over time. Let yourself enjoy it and have fun, because it isn't that deep. Sleep, stress, nutrition are always going to be the absolute GOAT when it comes to supporting our training and our well-being. And if you use your training as a form of emotional regulation, like I do, to support mental well-being and managing ADHD and autism symptoms, or you struggle with your day-to-day basics when it comes to things like sleep, stress and nutrition, it's okay to not go beast mode if you haven't had good sleep or you haven't eaten well or you're feeling stressed. It's okay to not chase a PB every week. Just show up more than you don't. I hope you have an amazing rest of your week. The next block of Fast and Ferocious, my hybrid group lift and run program, is starting 2 weeks from when this episode airs. You can join us for our deload week before we get into the next block of programming, or you can hit the ground running from day 1 of the new block. Fill in the form in the show notes to apply. Any questions you have about how anything works, pop them in there and I'll get back to you. Take it easy, Small Gains family. That is me out. Love you.